Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving, purpose-minded women who've written nonfiction books and want to amplify their message beyond the book. I'm a college professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, coaching, mentoring, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to use their books to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and purpose. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. So glad you're here and listening into the podcast. Really appreciate you for taking time out of your busy day, night schedule, and all the things to listen into the podcast. And today I'm talking with Jessica Bantom. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Jessica. Jessica is the author of the new book, Design for Identity, How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World. And I can't wait to hear all about that. But let me tell you a little bit more about Jessica. She is a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practitioner and workplace strategist who helps develop customized strategies for organizations that bring about transformational change. She's a compelling speaker, a certified facilitator, and coach, and she helps people and organizations reach their full potential to really actualize the values of inclusion and belonging, no matter what position they hold. And there's so much more we're going to hear about her. But in the meantime, welcome, Jessica Bantom.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Okay, so let's jump right in. Now, I just read a little bit about your book and a little bit about you, but you tell us in your own words. First, a little bit more about who you are and then the work you do, and then we'll get into the book too.
Sure. Thank you. I'd be glad to. So I am a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultant, and also a DEIB officer. And in addition to that, I have a background in interior design consulting with a specialization in color. So all of these things kind of come together in my book, where I'm really exploring this intersection of DEI and design, just out of my own personal passion about both topics, and also out of a need that I saw to make this connection and to start talking about identity in the context of the design process. So a lot of different things have led me here. I have what you probably call a non-linear or non-traditional career path. But everything has come together in this book, and it's exciting to see that happen and to have this, this new opportunity and experience as an author.
Yes, I love that. Okay, so since you mentioned it, tell us about a little bit about this career path that led you up to this book.
Sure. So it's interesting. I was an English major in undergrad. I finished school, came out in marketing, got into IT consulting as a technical writer. And then my consulting career continued over the past, 20 plus years to age myself. And over that time, I went from IT to focusing on communication. So going back to my background in writing and also change management. And within the last few years, I made the pivot into diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But in parallel with that, after probably a few years after I got into my professional career, I started having second thoughts about not pursuing interior design. So I decided at that point to go back to school. I got my master's in interior design, and I've also been living in that world and developing my career as an interior design consultant in parallel with my life as a management consultant.
Oh, so you were doing both at the same time?
Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I love that you were bringing both of your passions together.
Yes, it is exciting to see how they've woven together too, because it's really interesting. I'm sure anyone who has a non-linear career path can understand. You often feel like you're living in two separate worlds and two separate bubbles that you can't really see the intersection between them. But it's been interesting to see in the last few years how this evolution has taken place, and so many things that I thought were unrelated even came to mind as I was writing my book. So it's interesting to see all these connections being made through things that I even personally didn't see that they would ever kind of come together in any way that made sense.
Yeah. Is there one that comes to mind? You said there were a couple of, how you saw the pieces come together. Is there something that comes to mind about how two pieces came together from the two different worlds in the book?
Yes, so there's a couple things. One is my specialization in color. So during my interior design program, color was always an area of interest for me. I figured we'd get into it in a meaningful way, and we really didn't in a traditional kind of interior design curriculum. So that was something that I went outside of my program to pursue. And I was able to get a whole education in color through an international organization, actually. And as one of the components of that education was a focus on the cultural associations of color. And when I started making the connections in the book between identity and DEI and design, I was like, oh yeah, that was a very critical element in terms of one of the things in our designer toolkit being color, that we have to be mindful of the cultural associations of it when we are incorporating it into our projects. And our, whether it's a space, or you're designing like a piece of clothing, or you're designing a UI and UX interface, color is clearly a critical component there. So that's just one of the things that we have to be mindful of in terms of properly representing identity.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, who would ever think that color is
Right.
design? Yeah, it's really fascinating. Okay, so now let's move into your book. Tell us again the title, even though I mentioned it already. Tell us the title and then sort of the main message or the premise of the book.
Sure. The book is called Design for Identity: How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World. And the main point of it is about the importance of incorporating the topic of cultural identity into the design process. So it's not an afterthought. And it's intentionally meant to be a how-to book for the design industry, because as I've seen through my education and through my professional experience, that when we do actually go through the design process, identity is not a topic that is intentionally brought into the conversation. So that presents a lot of challenges and a lot of issues, because it can often leave it up to the designer to incorporate their interpretation of the customer's identity into the final product without having gotten insight into what's really important to the customer, what's really meaningful to them. And it leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation and potentially harm to be done by how a designer conveys identity without that firsthand feedback and information from the customer.
That's fascinating because I would have never thought about it. I just would never think about the role which makes so much sense now that, we hear you say it. But yeah, I feel like you're filling in a missing piece in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because I wasn't even fully aware of it being a missing piece myself, probably until I got more into DEI as a profession and starting to think about the significance of it beyond just from an operational standpoint. Like most organizations talk about internally when they talk about recruiting and when they talk about their corporate statements that a lot of them have issued, especially since the summer of 2020. But that doesn't always convey into how they actually deliver the service or product that they are known for to their actual customers. And it was funny too, because when I started exploring this kind of intersection, I had a Google alert set up for DEI and design. And a couple articles came through that were essentially talking about missteps that organizations had taken in terms of representing identity in their products, and the very public backlash that ensued as a result of that. And I started thinking, like, why was this not avoided? Why was it not caught?
Mm,
And it made me really conscious of the fact that we don't talk about it during the process.
mm.
And then sometimes, like in those instances, it's too late, it's out in the world, the damage has been done to the individuals who have been offended, and also to the brand identity, to the organizations. And I'm sure to some people internally within the organizations who probably saw it coming, but didn't feel that they had the agency to bring it up, that their opinion would be respected and taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, so it's wonderful that you sort of answered the call, so to speak.
Right.
All right, so what would you say? You have many hats: business owner, consultant, author. So let's focus on your author identity. Speaking of identity, all right, so let's think of your author identity. What would you say is your greatest challenge as you think about now putting this book out into the world and just take it into that author that author role? What would you say so far is your biggest challenge?
I think my biggest challenge is going to be the fact that my topic is so niche and it's so new. To me, it makes sense. Obviously, I thought enough of it to write a book about it. But I also wrote the book because I didn't see anything else out there in this whole universe of books that actually touched on the topic. So to me, that represented an opportunity to start a new dialogue. But the challenge then, of course, in terms of being an author is then you wonder, is there a reason that that was a gap? Like, do people care enough about this to really read my book? Or is it really an opportunity to just inject this new topic into this conversation? So I think there's a lot I think that just goes through any author's mind in terms of, especially as you're approaching the launch and this finally getting out into the world, is this really going to be relevant? Is it going to resonate? And is it really going to make a difference?
Yeah.
Yep.
That makes sense. My feeling is not that you asked me, but just throw in. My feeling is that it is going to make a difference. I think so.
Thank you.
So on the flip side of it, with this new book and your author identity, what has been your greatest joy at this point as you think about this work?
I think it's that, well, I know one particular moment was especially exciting. It was actually seeing the book and feeling it and having it in my hands and saying just, I did it. So many people talk about writing a book or I have some ideas, but knowing that I actually followed through and kind of kept this commitment to myself feels pretty good. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, and it's funny too because with all of the stuff that goes on with getting the book out, I often lost sight of that along the way, that yes, this is a big accomplishment. Because you start thinking about, like I said, the questions about, are people going to read this? How are they going to know it exists? Is this really going to make the impact I want it to? You do have to take that step back and be like, well, you did it, and as I mentioned, there's not another book out there that really gets into this topic. So yeah, I have to stop and pat myself on the back every once in a while to say, you're filling a gap, and you're also putting an idea out there that hasn't really been formalized in this way. And I should take a minute and just revel in that.
Yeah. Well, good for you for coming to that, and actually doing that and giving yourself a pat on the back. Because as most of us ambitious women, high achieving, we forget to do that, to pat ourselves on the back. So I'm glad you stepped back and did that. And now, what would you say is the greatest lesson that you learned so far? I know now at the time this podcast goes out, the book is launching right now, but still in the whole process, what would you say has been your greatest lesson?
I think it would be my greatest lesson has been to trust my gut and to trust my judgment in a whole range of different decisions that I've had to make over the course of this process. So one, just trusting that I felt that this was a message that needed to get out there and committing to making it happen. Another was also trusting my instinct in terms of which route I chose for publishing. I did a lot of research and talked to a lot of authors before I made that decision for myself. And there are many factors that kind of, pointed to the fact that traditional publishing wasn't going to be the journey for me. And then talking to other people who had self-published, got a lot of information there about how to do that the right way, or the right way for me. So I think that there were a lot of moments where, all of this stuff can seem so scary, especially for a first-time author. But I feel confident with the decisions that I made and the process that I took. And also, I think one of the best things that I did was to talk to other authors and to learn from their mistakes, learn from their successes, their lessons learned, and help that to inform my decisions about what I was going to do.
Yeah, that sounds like wisdom, to learn from others who've already done it. All right, so you kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's go a little bit deeper into this. And in what way does the book reflect a part of who you are?
That's a good one. I think it reflects a lot of me and my own identity and my own desire to see my identity and all the things that make me accurately portrayed and represented in the world. And that was one of the things that came to my mind as I was even sitting in the classroom in my design studios and just looking around at how little diversity there was, I started thinking, if designers design for everybody, how can there be so little diversity in this profession? And if this industry, which across design disciplines is essentially 90% white, it's like, how are these designers designing for me as a Black woman? How are they designing for me in the path in my lifestyle and everything that makes me me, all the components of my identity? And how authentic can that be if they don't know what my experience is? And that applies to so many of us who are not represented, whose lived experiences are not represented in the industry. That is a huge disservice to us. And I wanted to make that part of the discussion, to make this a standard part of the design approach, the design process, and not something that's, either completely ignored or done in a way that dishonors people's identities.
That makes sense. Now, it just occurred to me, because you mentioned the industry, the design industry, and I'm thinking there might be some people who are listening who might not be that familiar. What is included, or like what types of design are included when you talk about design industry?
That's a very good question. So when I speak of the design industry, I'm talking about disciplines ranging from fashion design to interior design, product design, UI, UX design, industrial design, and architecture and graphic design. So all of those different disciplines, the concepts in the book apply across all of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That makes sense. So broadly, it's designed broadly. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Which I'm still thinking that you are filling a gap, especially knowing that it's such a wide range of disciplines within the overall industry. All right. So now you know that, well, maybe you don't know. This podcast is for purpose-minded, what I call purpose-minded, high-achieving women who've written nonfiction books, and they want to make a difference in other people's lives. And you have a wealth of experience professionally and personally. So based on your experience, expertise, or any area of your life and work, what's something that you can share with the woman that I just described, particularly related to her author self? But it could be advice that encourages her personally or professionally.
God, I would say to her to value your own perspective and what you bring to the table. Because I think it's funny to me. I see a lot of high performing women who question themselves and question the validity of their thoughts and ideas, even though they have the proof in front of them, even on paper, of all that they can do. It always seems to be the people who are most high performing who are also the most self-critical. And, I think that we need to take a step back and recognize the value that we bring to any situation that we're in, the value of our perspectives and everything that we've learned through the many experiences that we've had, to see those as valid and to respect our own ideas enough to put them into a book, to really feel like, yes, I have something to say and it's relevant and it's worthy of spreading out in the world.
Yes, yes. Okay, all right. So that's great. All right. So now the title of the podcast is Leadership Purpose. And we talked about the purpose-minded women who are listening into the podcast. Now, in your thinking, is having purpose or a sense of purpose in your work, is that important for you, or do you think it's important for others to have? And if so, why? If not, why not?
That is a really good question. I personally have always found that to be important to me. And probably now that I think about it, the circuitous nature of my background or the path that I've taken has always been dictated by trying to find purpose in what I was doing at the time. So it's interesting, even looking at the path that I was on, as I mentioned, when I got into IT consulting originally, I got into that space. That was never really an intentional step for me. It just kind of happened. But even when I got into IT consulting, I started asking questions about the purpose of the system that we were working on. Started asking about how are we making sure that this system is actually filling the need of the users? And that asking those questions actually then created the next step of my progression in IT consulting, because I was talking to my project manager and he said, we don't really have anyone on the team who focuses on that. We are mostly a team of developers. We don't have the functional experts who focus on requirements. do you want to do it? And I said, sure. To me, it just didn't make sense for no one to own that. So that was one example where I also needed to make that work meaningful to me, because the technical side of it wasn't, it was a system. How do I make that relevant? So to me, I had to find that sweet spot in that particular instance that was going to make that work relevant to me. And then even further down the line in my consulting career, as I started supporting some projects in terms of communications, I started asking questions about, okay, I'm supporting the rollout of a system. So there's usually been an IT component to a lot of my management consulting experience, but even supporting the rollout of a system, started thinking about, how do we make sure people actually are going to use this? What is the process to get people on board, to get them to adopt this and to make it part of their daily routine? And that pivoted me into change management. So that was a discipline I started pursuing. And it's funny too, how in all of these spaces where I was trying to find purpose in my work, all of those things have also carried over into my book, and to my work as a DEI practitioner. To me, you can't talk about DEI and implementing and embedding these values without seeing it as a cultural transformation. And how do you support a cultural transformation? Through change management concepts. So it's really fun. All these different things I never thought would be connected, that I didn't necessarily know there would be a purpose or a place for further down the line. They've all come back. So I'm glad that I stuck to that idea of making whatever I was doing purposeful, because ultimately it is coming together in a purposeful way that is the most fulfilling to me at this point.
I love that, because each time you connected a dot, it almost led you to the next thing. And now we see the full picture for at least this season of your life, right?
Right.
Life is always evolving, but you connected the dots and it brought you to this work and this book in a place where you have meaning and fulfillment in your work.
Yeah. And who would have predicted any of that?
It all came from your pursuit of purpose.
Right.
Right. And in service, helping whatever project, whatever work you were doing, helping the work and yourself. Really inspiring story.
Thank you.
And I'm sure people will be looking forward to hearing more about that in your book. Now, is there anything else that I haven't thought to ask you that you want to talk about and share? Because you've been very generous and I want to be mindful of your time.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. I think just in general, there's this call to be an author requires a level of courage that I haven't previously kind of tapped into. But at the same time, I feel like everything that I've done up to now has helped me build the courage to actually execute in this way. So it's gratifying to see all of this come together. And it's also gratifying. I think any author should kind of claim that and really recognize that it does take a lot of courage to do this. And that alone should be one of the things we kind of reward ourselves for, because there is a level of vulnerability to this. I was talking to a friend, even recently about getting ready for the book launch. And they were just saying, like, well, how does it feel? Like it's like you're putting your baby out in the world and asking people if they think it's cute. And it is very true. I mean, there is a lot that goes into this process from us as individuals. And I think it requires a lot of reflection on our part personally. But we should also just take that time to recognize, like, yeah, I did this, and it is a big thing. And I feel like everything that stretches us in this way just builds up even more confidence to do the next thing.
Yeah.
So that's been one of the great rewards, I think, of this process.
Yeah. Was there something that helped you come to that place of courage and confidence?
Honestly, I think it's all of the things that all the things that have challenged me up to this point. And in some ways, having to justify even my career decisions over the course of my career to others and sometimes to myself. But, there all of those things where I did make that effort to identify the purpose and to go out on a limb and make something really relevant to me. that was also building courage in the process. And I don't think I realized that either. Like stepping into that gap, identifying the gaps, and then saying, well, all right, I'll give it a shot. It took courage to do that. And in the moment, I don't think I recognized that either. But like I said, I think all of those moments of trying something new and being willing to fail and sometimes failing, all of that builds up the confidence to just keep trying and to keep going. And it reinforces the fact that I feel like it's worth it to pursue what you find purposeful.
Yes, well, I'm glad you kept striving because it brought us here to this moment and to your book, Design for Identity, and I can't wait for people to read it. All right, so if they're saying, which I imagine people are saying right now, how can they be in touch with you and hear more about what you're doing, know more about you and what you're doing?
Yes, I would say to first go to my website, www.jessicabantom.com. There's information there about me and my book, and also you can contact me through the page there for speaking, consulting, any inquiries that you have about this intersection of DEI and design. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I love connecting with people there. That's been such a gift, especially during the pandemic. I feel like my network grew exponentially through LinkedIn during that time. And I'm also on Instagram at Jessica Bantom.
Okay, so we'll make sure we'll have those in the show notes. All right, you have it there, everyone. And Jessica Bantom, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and sharing your insights and wisdom today on the podcast. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Okay, everyone. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me on my website, robinlowens.com, robinlowens.com, or like Jessica, I hang out on LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD. Robin L. Owens, PhD. I am on other social media sites too, but I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. And if you are an author and you've been thinking about creating a course for your book, you want to amplify your message and get it out there even further and save more time, have a greater reach, and you've been thinking about creating a course, I have a free training that will help you do that. You can just head on over to createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and you'll get my free training there. And in the meantime, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.